with it. So let's start with chapter 1 of why does impact investment matter? Why, in the context of a forum on economy generally, it's really interesting, right, that 3 out of the 4 presentations so far have an investment bent to them. And I'll note, I was an activist who chose investment as a tool, would not care about investment otherwise if not for the social justice values that we're able to do. And also because of some of the limitations that I and many others were seeing with philanthropy. And I want to note in the context of this conversation, you might be sitting here going, well, I'm not a philanthropist or I'm not an investor, but any of you that have a pension fund that graduated from a university, which control $400 billion nationwide, are affiliated with a foundation in some way, we're all investors, we're all philanthropists. This applies to all of us through some institution or another. So I want to start out addressing what are some of the challenges in philanthropy that we have the opportunity to address through impact investment, and knowing that philanthropy, for all the good that it's done, has some serious limitations that we need to address as a social movement. So the first, some of you may have seen this book, The Revolution Will Not Be Funded. Does this ring a bell? It's a great one if you haven't seen it, but really looking at some of the limitations of where foundation funding comes from, and that there may not always be an interest in the world order toppling itself. And that when you look at philanthropy in the US, and when you put aside, I love the opera and the ballet as much as anyone, but when you take that segment out of philanthropic giving, what percentage would you guess is left over for social justice work? Throw out a number. Well, luckily you all are incredibly overly pessimistic. It's 12%, which is still pretty miserable, right? This is still not going to get us out of where we need to go. But this is just to show that the amount of resources that all these incredible organizations are fighting over is crumbs at the end of the day. And this is only 12% of philanthropy, right? So this is what happens when you go too quickly. There's a cupcake in the presentation. We'll get there. The conclusion of that book, The Revolution Will Not Be Funded, which was about how do we ensure that community organizations have their independence, right, are able to do the things that they want to do and not be dictated by the terms of foundations. But the conclusion of that book was that we should have more bake sales, right? And you can only, I can eat cupcakes all day long, but you can only have so many bake sales and run a community movement that's going to be strong enough to be able to shift economies, right? So we haven't really come up with what are good strategies for community autonomy if they're not going to be from that 12% of philanthropy. So then the next challenge is that philanthropy is really only a drop in the bucket when you look at the overall global economy, right? So this builds on some of what Donna was mentioning. So that teeny tiny yellow dot in the middle, $46 billion. Okay, that's still a large number. But when you compare that to the $196 trillion in global capital markets that circulates every year, right, a renewable resource, this is like the ultimate David and Goliath, that I have that 46 million that's trying to fight back against an economy that is completely dwarfing it. So if we're only playing in that little circle, then we're not going to get to that broader change that we need. And this leads to the other question, even within that little circle of philanthropy, we're only working with 5% of our resources, right? Foundations are only required to give away 5% of their assets a year. And I just want to note, think of any other industry. Imagine that I'm the CEO of Chevron down the block in Richmond, and I spend 95% of my time building yachts and 5% of my time exploring oil. What is my board going to say to me? You're out of here, right? So in any other industry, when is it acceptable to use 5% of your resources towards your stated mission? The fact that we sort of let this happen is pretty preposterous. And when you think about, Goldman Sachs or the average financial firm doing 1 or 2% a year in corporate philanthropy, and a foundation that manages its money and then gives away 5%, you know what? It's really not all that different. So are these financial management firms that happen to have a slightly larger CSR program, or are they actually foundations working for the public good, right? And how do we really work to leverage that 100%? If not, we're really missing the boat. Then this leads to another real challenge, that foundations are often working at cross purposes in terms of their investment and their programmatic work. And one of the great examples that I'm sorry to say is incredibly dated because it hasn't improved is from the Gates Foundation. This was a series of articles in the LA Times, I want to say back to 2001. that was recently updated, and it went systematically through their programmatic areas and their investments. So the Gates Foundation puts $218 million into health programs in the Niger Delta to deal with all the health problems caused by the oil companies. And at the same time, it invested $423 million into the energy companies that caused the problem, right? So this is like, you know, eating cheeseburgers all day and then taking a pill at the end and hoping that solves the problem. You can't invest twice as much money in the problem as the solution and expect that you're going to come out on top, right? Pretty basic math. But we see this happening all the time if foundations are investing, or individual philanthropists, I'd say as well, or individuals. If 95% of our resources goes into the bad and then we just donate a little bit to the good, right? It's not the sort of integrated approach that we need. So this is where impact investment becomes this really interesting solution. And this is the classic definition from the Rockefeller Foundation, that investment with an intention to generate social and environmental impact beyond the financial return. So it's sort of, as you would say, have your cake and eat it too. You can still, and I think in the context of things like pension funds, it's important to not say that financial return is bad, right? Financial return is how we're able to support ourselves, how we're able to do more great philanthropic work. But let's make sure that in the meantime, that our investments can actually maximize the social and environmental value in the process. Now, the good news is that this is happening, right? $9 billion committed just in 2013, but still only 1% of foundations. And I don't know what the stat is for individuals, but let's say there's still limited presence of capital that really has these strong social and environmental justice values embedded. And ideally, if we do this, it's a great way of being able to get resources back in the hands of communities to be able to generate productive projects. So going back to the revolution will not be funded, and how do we do things that are not just bake sales, right, of being able to generate much more resources for communities, being able to create that community leadership for projects, and then hold the economy accountable to all of us, right? So this is the grand vision, this is the grand promise for impact investment. And then the challenge, as I switch presentations here, is how you actually do that, right?